Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview. A first look then at what is on the front pages. In the next half hour then, we will see what's making the headlines with the political editor of the Daily Mirror, Pippa Crerar, and the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole. And after 11, they will stay with me to give their take on the stories of the night. Very grateful, thank you. Front pages then, let's take a look, shall we? The Financial Times leads with the UK, the EU and the US all considering sanctions against the government of Belarus after it had a flight diverted to Minsk so a prominent opposition journalist could be arrested. The Metro describes the Belarusian regime as pirates of Europe's skies. Marcus Rashford's plea to the government to help hungry children is on the front page of The Mirror as MPs debate the England footballers' petition calling for extra assistance for struggling families. The Daily Mail leads with its splash on the number of British firms that have been sold off to private equity since the start of the coronavirus outbreak. The Daily Telegraph understands that a new raft of COVID rules will stipulate that even people who are fully vaccinated will still have to self-isolate for 10 days if they come into contact with someone with COVID. And a Guardian investigation has found that 8,700 people died of the virus, having caught it in hospitals where they were being treated for other conditions. More papers still to come in. We will take a look at those when we get them. We'll be joined then for the next 90 minutes by Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole. Welcome. Thank you very much indeed for bravely kicking us off with this one. But let's get to the main story for us and the main story for many of the newspapers then, which is the Metro, the pirates of Europe's skies, and what we do about Belarus. Harry, what do you reckon?
Yeah, it's just an astonishing story. We've had a spate of these in recent weeks, of stories that I've been sitting there at my desk writing up, and they could be from a different time, a time gone by. We had the Jersey blockade, which read something like something out of the Napoleonic Wars, and then this, which it could have been straight out of a sort of a Cold War thriller. Just an astonishing breach of all international rules and norms and any modern precedent for this, really. And one that's slightly left, I think, the EU, the UK and the US slightly sort of just, almost with their jaws on the floor. And what can they actually do? There's obviously questions around the Kremlin's involvement with Belarus, given the proximity, the location, and the history of the relationship between those two countries. But beyond actually, shutting our airspace and sending off increasingly angry statements, this is a bit of a pickle because actually, what can any other country do that's a suitable response to this clear, flagrant breach of the law, but isn't going to kick off World War III?
Well, that's a step that took me by surprise, to be fair, calling it that. And one hopes, Pippa, that the international community had already taken action over what they described as a stolen election by Alexander Lukashenko, protesters thrown in jail after weeks and weeks of protests across many cities in Belarus. So exactly, that's the point. What more can they do when hopefully they've already done something?
Yes, and you do wonder whether Vladimir Putin is sitting there watching it all, rubbing his hands in glee, because, of course, any action beyond sort of condemnation that international leaders, be it the EU or the White House, take against Belarus, if it ends up isolating Belarus, all it ends up doing is pushing them closer to Moscow and sort of strengthening that alliance. Harry and I are both journalists. We're all journalists here, and I sort of sit and watch how this Belarusian blogger, he ran a Telegram channel, and through it he organised or helped organise some of those protests against the election results that you mentioned there, Anna. He has been singled out in quite an extraordinary way. I mean, to divert a whole civilian aircraft to away from its flight path, apparently on the personal orders of Lukashenko, is really quite something. And there was apparently Belarusian KGB agents on the flight with him. And when obviously they landed in Minsk, and he was whisked away with his girlfriend to prison. And we've had this really striking video tonight of him doing an interview in which he's claiming he's been well treated. Well, what you don't see is what happens when the camera goes off. And as journalists, it is really striking that we, in comparison, live in a completely different world. I mean, we can criticize our government, and that we regularly do at the Mirror, as much as we want, and we do not expect to end up thrown into prison and to have sort of like an astonishing event like this to take place.
Yes, I suppose he was blamed, wasn't he, for many of those massive protests we saw, because he ran this popular messaging app that played a key role in helping organise those protests. So as far as the government in Belarus were concerned, he was a big deal. But you've got the G7 coming up in a couple of weeks, 2.5 weeks, Harry. You've had all these misdemeanours around the world in the last few years, from, Putin and supposedly state-sponsored Novichok poisoning, Jamal Khashoggi. You've got this. It feels like certain nations are emboldened or no longer respect or fear the West. So what do these G7 leaders do about this sort of the geopolitics? I mean, I haven't even mentioned China and the Uyghurs there. It goes on, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, of course, can't kick out Russia once again from that grouping. But again, this goes back to my point I was making earlier: is when states are clearly willing to act with such with such willingness to break all norms and rules, it does put leaders into a seriously tricky situation. I think the good news is, to some degree, we will have a more conventional United States at the G7. In fact, it's actually happening this time, as opposed to the one delayed last year by Donald Trump. And the one before that, I think, was the brilliant one where he refused to sign the communique at the end and ended up having a sort of row in front of the cameras with Angela Merkel and co. So I think we might get a slightly more conventional joined up West at the G7, but it does go to that point of beyond sanctions and targeting. We've got sort of new powers to target individuals and who break the rules, and global sanctions regimes do have teeth. But if people are willing to not play by the rules of the international order, it's very hard to come up with a conventional response.
Yes, absolutely. The FT then as well. Belarus faces the threat of Western reprisals after aviation piracy. Already we know action has been taken in the air, the banning of, the Belarusian carrier, flight paths and so on. So action's already being taken, isn't it? But we'll certainly see how that plays out. But a great deal of angst and anger about what happened in the skies, certainly. Shall we move on, Pippa, to the Daily Telegraph? This is the big question about, once you're vaccinated, how are you allowed to behave? And the Daily Telegraph suggesting that even the vaccinated will still have to self-isolate.
Yeah, and this front page, if you just read the headline, it's quite striking, isn't it? You sort of think, well, hang on a second, if surely one of the benefits of being vaccinated twice means that I can resume some sort of normal life, particularly as we're at this stage in the pandemic, we're sort of one step off emerging from the roadmap entirely. But then if you read into it, it's clear that, we all know that while the vaccination can prevent serious illness and hospitalizations, and the good news this week looks like it is that it will do the same with the Indian variant as it has done with previous variants, and will help protect people. What it doesn't do is stop transmission entirely. And actually, there's still a quite high chance of transmitting coronavirus, regardless of whether you've had the vaccination or not. You won't get symptoms yourself, but you could still pass it on to others. And because there are still so many people that haven't had both vaccinations, I think we're on about 30 million now that have had one vaccination, and then of course there's many more younger people and also people in older groups or potentially vulnerable that haven't been vaccinated. There are still plenty of people at risk. So this is behind this decision that is apparently going to continue, that if you come into contact with somebody with COVID, you need to self-isolate. And, we've just, the last couple of weeks, started talking about this return to normality and how in only a few short weeks' time we might be able to lift all social distancing rules. So, for example, you can go to the pub and instead of ordering at your table, you can go and stand at the bar and order a pint and chat to somebody behind the bar there. And so potentially also not having to wear face masks anymore. And yet here we are. It feels like there's actually going to still be this big element of like government control and sort of having to take care potentially for some time to come So, again, I guess it's just like another reminder that even in the UK, when we're doing so well with vaccination rollout, we're not there yet.
And I suppose there's a safety first argument to this, which takes us to The Guardian, Harry. 8,700 people died after catching COVID in hospital. This was a really big concern for many people, certainly. Up to 8,700, according to official NHS data obtained by The Guardian. And the question is whether people would still feel safer wearing face masks and keeping their distance, certainly indoors. Do you think our behaviour will change, as Patrick Vallance suggested a couple of weeks ago?
Absolutely. If you look at the impact that previous pandemics had on Asian countries, where mask wearing is on public transport, if you've got a runny nose, is considered the norm. I think for a very long time we will be, if you've come into contact with someone with COVID, you will be forced into isolation, regardless of whether you've had the vaccine. They talk about it in terms of protecting the vaccine rollout, and it will be part of this sort of a new normal. Things, people we've talked about this before on this very program. People haven't quite woken up yet to the fact that the new normal post-pandemic world is going to be different in some ways, and I think this is a key example of that. I think it will feel very different in July if the Prime Minister gets his wish to be able to drop wearing masks in pubs, in shops, in workplaces by law, but obviously people are going to be encouraged to wear them if they want to. I think the 1.5 metre social distancing thing is really crucial to lift in order to get people back into the workplaces. But I won't be surprised if next Christmas and the years to come, people carry on wearing masks on the tube. It's just it almost seems, like common sense and odd that we didn't before.
Yeah, interesting. We will see how people react to that, certainly. Harry, Pippa, plenty more in just a moment, including a controversial figure in sport and the press. We will discuss the legacy of Max Mosley. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me now, Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole. Welcome back to both of you. To the Daily Mirror then, Pippa, why don't you kick us off on this? Is Marcus Rashford still making his efforts felt? This is certainly amongst the politicians then.
Yes, so you will remember well that Marcus Rashford forced 2 government U-turns on free school meals last year and had been campaigning on child poverty for a long time. I mean, he's talked obviously in the past of he himself having forced himself to sleep 2 or 3 times a week as a child because he was hungry. And this latest intervention by him is basically designed to force the government to adopt its own national food strategy, which it's drawn up but hasn't yet implemented. And Marcus Rashford is understandably very frustrated with this when you consider that we live in a country where there's no shortage of food, just apparently a shortage of money to pay for it. And he would like the government to expand its provision of expand access to free school meals, provide more meals and activities during the school holidays, and also to expand the Healthy Start scheme. These are not just his ideas or the opposition ideas. These are, in fact, the government's own ideas. And it seems quite incredible, really, particularly during a pandemic where we've seen so many people suffering, so many people out of work, and access to food banks rising, demand for food banks rising, that the government hasn't moved quicker on this. I mean, even if you strip out sort of the humanity of it, on a political level, you might expect them to recognise that letting kids go hungry is not a good look for any political party, and they were damaged by it last year. And you'd think that they'd want to act sooner rather than later.